friends, it's Betsy from A Flourishing Place, and in today's video I'm sharing the details of our subway tile kitchen backsplash. Well, hey, if we haven't met yet, my name is Betsy. I have a wonderful husband and 2 small kids, and today I wanted to show you our finished subway tile kitchen backsplash. This is a DIY project I've wanted to do since we moved in, and I am so excited that we got it done. So I will start by saying I am not a tiling expert. This is definitely my first time doing a tile project, and so if you're looking for like a technical how-to video, that is not this video. I will link a couple of videos in the description box below that were very detailed and really helped me. My purpose in doing this video is just to give you a perspective as a first timer, basically telling you what we did and what we learned along the way. And so I want to share with you the supplies we used, the process that we did, the cost breakdown, and also share a few things that we wish we would have done differently. And then finally, of course, I want to share the before and after and show you how this tile project turned out. For supplies, I opted to go with a basic 3x6 white ceramic subway tile. That is as basic as you can get for a kitchen tile backsplash. I was installing this backsplash over finished painted drywall. And so on the advice of a friend who's done way more tiling than I have done, I roughed up the wall with 80 grit sandpaper just to prep it for the adhesive, and that worked wonderfully. I used Mapai Type 1 adhesive, and this is designed for a space like this in the kitchen where you're going to be dealing with water from the sink, steam from the stove, and that kind of stuff. I picked up a trowel. I picked up 1/8 inch spacers. I grabbed pre-mixed grout. This is also another thing that I went super basic on. I opted to do pre-mixed grout rather than mix it myself. I also picked up a grout float and kind of a middle of the road one. I didn't get one that was super duper expensive, and I didn't get the cheapest one. I kind of got one in the middle, and it worked really well. I picked up a sponge, and also something I already had on hand was a microfiber cloth, and this is for the grouting portion of things. We rented a tile wet saw. Now, there's a lot of videos out there saying that you can use a scoring tool. I think for certain tile projects, you definitely can do that, and it's way less expensive. The ones that I looked at were around $30 to $40, so super easy, but you can't do the complicated cuts with a tile scorer. And even with a wet saw, some of the cuts are a little bit tricky, and so it would help, even if you have access to one, it would help to have an angle grinder with a diamond blade. Also grabbed a Sharpie. I used this to mark measurements where I needed to cut, and Sharpie is great because on a glossy ceramic tile like what I was using, the Sharpie just rubs right off. I picked up caulk, and it was the same brand and in the same color as the pre-mixed grout that I got. Grabbed sealer to seal after the grouting was finished, and I picked up pre-primed quarter round, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later in the video. So after sandpapering, I wiped off the dust, I cut the power, and then I started applying the adhesive, and I applied tile from the bottom up. So this is really important. I learned this really quickly. You start in the bottom row and you apply up. You don't apply from the top down. So you're applying from the bottom up and you're putting spacers in there. Otherwise the tiles kind of start to collapse on each other and it can be a real mess. I was placing spacers as I went. I made sure to keep the grout lines clear because I've been told that it's really difficult if you get adhesive that is squishing up through the grout lines and then it dries. When you go to grout, there's no place for the grout to go in, and then you're trying to chip out adhesive, and it's obviously very set and very firm by that point. So I was just making sure as I went along with this little mini screwdriver that I had, keeping those grout lines clear, making sure nothing was squishing up and would prevent me from putting grout in there later. So you get in a groove. The first section of wall that I did, I was running around like a chicken with my head cut off, like, I've got to apply tile, and now I've got to go cut it, and the adhesive is gonna set. My husband was like, calm down, lady. So you don't want to be too casual in how you're applying tile and take too much time, otherwise your adhesive will start to set and that's a problem. But you definitely don't need to go as fast as I was going at the beginning of this project. I relaxed, I got comfortable, I got a feel for things. It takes a little bit to get the knack of using the saw and how to measure, but you figure it out and things start to get into a little bit of a rhythm. So the 2 more complicated cuts that you'll need to do when doing a project like this are L cuts and U cuts. And like I said, I've linked videos down below that talk more in depth about these kind of cuts. Just suffice it to say, for this video, for me as a beginner, L cuts I got the knack of very quickly. U cuts take a lot of patience and a lot of time. They're not hard, they're just tedious. And so it's just being patient, which is something I'm not great at. One of the supplies that we purchased that I forgot to mention earlier was a diamond file, and I loved having this because after you make these cuts on the wet saw, oftentimes you need to file down a little bit of a rough edge or something, and so I was using this this file a lot. So one of the questions in doing a project like this is, where do you end the tile? And I would say it doesn't matter as long as you're consistent and it looks really good and straight. So we opted to end the tile here, like I'm showing in this picture. The only tricky part we had was right beside the fridge. We have an outlet that was just very inconveniently placed. So we didn't feel obviously like we could just go right through the outlet with the end of the tile. And so we opted to go out beyond the outlet and finish it out there because it was right next to the fridge. It wouldn't show a ton. And honestly, I don't think anybody really notices. It was just something we had to deal with. So you might have a tricky something like that in your kitchen, but as long as you're being fairly consistent and you do something that looks uniform and intentional, you're gonna be fine. A lot of people in a backsplash project like this will use Schluter, which is a trim, and it gives you this nice clean edge rather than the factory edge of the tile. We opted not to use Schluter, and honestly I'm 50-50 on this. If we had the project to do over again, yeah, it would have made the edges look nice. We opted to go with a premixed grout, like I said before, that blended really well with the paint that we had on our walls, and so I opted to just finish the edges with grout. Some people might really hate that and think, oh, that looks awful. It's fine. It's honestly, I don't have a strong opinion about it, but Schluter is definitely an option. It's a great option, just wasn't something that we opted to use. So we finished the edges with grout. Grouting took patience, but something I quickly learned was 45-degree angle. You need to be applying the grout and kind of pushing it in with your grout float at a 45-degree angle. And that was really important. I noticed a huge difference if you're trying to hold it straight out or if you're trying to press it more up right against flush, the tile. It's not gonna work that great, but at a 45-degree angle, you can really press that grout into the lines and it goes pretty quickly. Then you're just sponging it off. And so you've got a damp sponge that you're constantly wringing out and then reapplying with clean water. I found moving the sponge in a circular motion really helped to keep the grout in the lines and help minimize any unsightly streaks. I went over it last with a microfiber cloth, and this was after the grout was setting, and it really helped. There's kind of a haze that is on the tiles even after you've sponged off the grout. And so I used that microfiber cloth just to buff the tiles, and it worked wonderfully. So you're just buffing away at those tiles, taking care of that haze, and it gets that all off of there after you're done with the sponging part. And then next we caulked, and we used the same brand of caulk that our premixed grout was, and so the caulk was the exact same color as the grout, which was great. And this was all along the bottom part of the tile. I hated this part, honestly. My husband was like, why do you hate this part? He's like, this is the easy part. He goes, the application and the grouting, that was the hard part. And I was like, oh, it's a detail job, and I don't like detail jobs. It was also my first time caulking, and so I didn't really have a feel for how to caulk and how to do it in a non-messy way. So I learned a lot with caulking. You really have to be careful not to get too much in the gap, otherwise that becomes really messy. You also have to be patient and just keep smoothing it over and over with your finger until you get the look you want. So if you smooth it one time and it doesn't look good enough, don't freak out, don't get mad, just keep working it with your finger. Next, we sealed the grout with a sealer. And this feels honestly a little tedious and anticlimactic, but we definitely didn't want to skip this step. I have also linked a great video on this below that goes into more detail on sealing. I found this video super helpful. This guy answered all the questions I had, so I hope that you find it helpful as well. Okay, last thing we did, and this is not something that you need to do for every tile project, but for our tile project, we did, so I'm just gonna include it here. Number one, our cabinets are not square, and so when we did the first top line of tile, it looked terrible. So I looked at my husband and I was like, what are we gonna do? This looks awful. So we decided we were going to trim out the underside of the cabinet with quarter round. And we ended up deciding to do this, obviously under all of them. If you're gonna do it under one, do it under all of them. But there were a couple of the other cabinets that, did not end up looking so great either. I was like, okay, fine, whatever. So as long as the visible part on the bottom looks good, we will cover up the top with quarter round and nobody will be the wiser. So like I said, you likely wouldn't have to do this step, but I just wanted to include it and show you the whole process of what we did. All right, so cost breakdown. How much did this cost doing it ourselves? It was about 30 square feet of tiling, and it costs about $280. And this is the cool part. We had to rent a tile saw, and that tile saw rental, it was $54 a day, so that was $108 of the project cost. And so if you're able to borrow a wet saw from somebody and you can cut that cost, it would be under $200 that you could get this project done. Now, obviously, if you're working with a more expensive tile or you're working with a much larger area or there's some different variables there, it's gonna alter the cost. But we were stoked to be able to get this project done for under $300. So now, things I would do differently. The number one is thinner grout lines. Now, this is definitely personal preference, but if I had it to do over again, I would do 1/16 inch grout lines rather than 1/8 inch grout lines. And the reason why is because as a beginner, the less grout line you have, or the thinner it is, the less your little mistakes are gonna show. And the thicker the grout line is, the more that stuff is gonna show up. The one thing, if you're going with thinner grout lines, you will wanna go with an unsanded grout. And the grout that we went with, that was a pre-mixed grout, it says that it is good down to 1/16 inch, and that may very well be true. Obviously, I didn't test it, but I was told by someone, again, someone who has way more tiling experience than I do, not to use sanded grout in grout lines that are that thin, so like a 1/16 inch grout line. So even though the container said it was okay to use that sanded grout with a 1/16 inch grout line, I opted to go with the advice of the friend, and so I went with larger grout lines, 1/8 inch grout lines, honestly, just for the sake of using the pre-mixed grout, which now in retrospect, it's like probably wouldn't have been that big of a deal to mix up the grout myself. But at the beginning of the project, I was intimidated and feeling a little overwhelmed. And so I was trying to simplify everything that I could. So again, no harm done, but I would just recommend, especially for a beginner, doing those thinner grout lines. They look so nice and it's gonna help to hide any mistakes. One mistake that we made that at the time we didn't realize we were making, because we did not use Schluter, we don't have a wood frame around our kitchen window. And so it's just drywall. And so we tiled right up to the edge of that window. But it did look raw in the sense that there wasn't anything there finishing it. Like I didn't have any space to finish it with grout or anything like that. We ended up using caulk to sort of seal the edge and kind of to fill the gaps, as it were. But that would not have been my first choice. If I had it to do over again, I either would have backed that tile off a little bit so that I had a little bit of space between the tile and the edge of the window to finish it with grout, or I would have used Schluter there, or I would have done something to give it a more finished edge. If you're going to go up to an edge like that, you better have a plan for how you're gonna finish the edge of that tile and make it look really good. Another thing I learned, and this was definitely something positive, and that is I definitely am glad that I chose to go with adhesive. Right now on TikTok and Instagram and all this stuff, it's all the rage to use something called Muscle Bound, which I researched, and nothing wrong with Muscle Bound. It's super easy to use, but here are the downsides. One is the cost difference. It cost just under $19 for a huge tub of tile adhesive that I used. To buy enough Muscle Bound for what I needed would have cost $80, 80. The frugal part of me just could not stand spending that much when I knew I could do adhesive for $18. So I opted to go with the adhesive, and no regrets. It was really easy to use. It was easy to learn how to use the trowel. And so that was not nearly as scary as I had been envisioning beforehand. Another reason for why I decided not to use Muscle Bound is because I had heard from several people that if tile gets wet, it won't adhere to the Muscle Bound. That's a problem because when you're using a wet saw, which like I said earlier, we had to use for this project, your tiles get wet. And so people were having to put them on cookie sheets and like dry their tiles in the oven and then bring them out and then stick them on the Muscle Bound. And I heard that and I was like, holy cow. You want to talk about adding stress to a project when you're already just trying to learn the whole process and how it goes. I didn't want to be taking tiles in and out of the oven. And so I opted to go with the adhesive, and I have absolutely no regrets. So after all of that, I am happy to show you the before and after of our kitchen. I'll show you what it looked like at the beginning, and then I'll show you what it looks like now after the tile installation. I've mentioned before, I have a playlist for the refresh on this kitchen, so if you're interested in watching more videos, I'll add to that playlist as we do more in the kitchen. Go ahead and click that playlist if you're interested in watching. I would just encourage you, if you're feeling nervous or intimidated, I was too, but you can do it, and the best way to learn is just by getting your hands dirty and jumping in and doing it. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. I make videos on this channel all about decluttering, organizing, and creating beauty in your home on a budget, and I will see you next time. Bye.